WorldView. Today, China's defiant claim amid economic strain. We will not kneel. This bold declaration doesn't come from a triumphant superpower, but from a nation grappling with a faltering economy, declining exports, and a government quietly making concessions. Broadcast loudly on Chinese state television, the statement rings more like a fragile denial of an undeniable reality. What is the world witnessing here? A fierce U.S. China trade war, or a prolonged drama of pride, honor, and unacknowledged retreats? More crucially, does China truly stand unbowed, or is it bending at the negotiating table while projecting defiance for the cameras? Before we dive into the analysis, we invite you to like and subscribe to WorldView Today for the most incisive takes on global events. Let's unpack the context. On April 29, 2025, China's foreign ministry released a propaganda video titled "No Kneeling." That same day, the Ministry of Commerce claimed the U.S. had repeatedly initiated calls for negotiations. Domestic audiences cheered, and Chinese social media erupted with confidence that America was rattled, that made-in-China goods had forced President Trump to back down. But the reality veers sharply elsewhere. Western media has not corroborated claims of U.S. outreach for peace. In fact, the Trump administration continues to escalate tariffs on key Chinese exports: solar panels, steel, aluminum, electric vehicles, and lithium batteries, sectors critical to strategic competition. The U.S. doesn't deny contact between the two sides, but refutes being the one to initiate. In a trade war, it's not about who calls first. It's about who secures favorable terms. That's where true leverage lies. Here's the critical point. China's public is being fed a carefully crafted narrative. This propaganda play leans on national pride, but distorts facts to paint an illusion of strength. The irony? Each time China vows not to yield, a new list of U.S. goods quietly gains tariff exemptions. Coinciding with the no-kneeling rhetoric, China lifted tariffs on over 130 U.S. imports, including medical equipment, chemical raw materials, and potentially leased aircraft. A substantive concession cloaked in defiant slogans. Now let's look at the U.S. perspective. A nation of 340 million, with a fragmented retail landscape where even giants like Walmart, Amazon, and Costco hold only 20–30% of market share. Many in China believe Americans can't survive without made-in-China goods. But the data tells a different story. Chinese products, while abundant, are not indispensable, and they're being replaced daily. Walmart, the poster child of low-cost retail, sourced 80% of its imports from China in 2020. By 2023, that figure dropped to 60%. Chinese goods on Walmart shelves, just over 40%, with the share shrinking further in 2025. Home Depot, another retail titan, slashed reliance even more dramatically. In 2023, it imported from Vietnam 5,700 times, compared to just 38 from China. Amazon, due to its open e-commerce platform, saw Chinese sellers surge post-pandemic, with their share rising from under 20% in 2020 to 28% in 2023. But Amazon accounts for just over 4% of U.S. retail. Even if Chinese goods make up 30% of that sliver, their overall impact is limited. Over half of U.S. retail comes from small, local stores with short supply chains, relying minimally on Chinese imports. By category, Chinese dominance is overstated. Clothing from China is just 30%, with Vietnam, Bangladesh, and India filling the gap. Consumer electronics, similarly diversified with fierce competition from South Korea, Japan, and Mexico. In retail, the sector closest to daily life, China's grip is loosening. Why? Global trade isn't about honor, it's about cost and benefit. Americans don't buy Chinese goods for their origin. They buy them because they're cheap. But if cheaper alternatives emerge elsewhere, they pivot. This logic applies to the U.S. government too. President Trump has threatened tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese goods. Yet when markets wobble, he signals potential leniency. This isn't weakness. It's a calculated test of America's economic tolerance. Strong April 2025 job numbers embolden tougher rhetoric. Weaker data prompts softer tones. It's not inconsistency, it's strategy. China's leadership, however, lacks such flexibility, shackled by the weight of face. This intangible asset is being elevated to the level of power and economy. When a regime prioritizes pride over reality, responses become distorted. Every concession is paired with a display of defiance. This evokes echoes of the 19th century Opium Wars, where Qing dynasty generals reported victories while British forces seized forts. A rival's negotiation offer was spun as groveling surrender. The louder China proclaims, "We will not kneel," the clearer the world sees the quiet concessions. So does Trump's tariff war work? And if so, where does its success lie? The answer isn't just in the numbers, like the U.S. China trade deficit dropping from $421 billion in 2018 to $252 billion in 2023, before ticking up to $295 billion in 2024. It's in the long-term strategic shift. China no longer dominates the U.S. market as it once did. Its goods now detour through Vietnam, Mexico, and other trade partners, often relabeled to dodge tariffs. This tariff evasion by labeling is rampant, prompting Trump to shift focus from China to allies like Vietnam, Mexico, and Canada, demanding transparency on goods origins. His broader aim, transform America's free trade network into a fortified economic stronghold. This strategy operates on two levels. First, block Chinese goods masquerading as imports from other nations. Second, force global supply chains to exit China, returning to the U.S. or trusted allies. This de-risking approach, short of full decoupling, reduces reliance on a single supply chain. Trump's goal isn't to collapse China's economy, but to pull manufacturing away, rebuild U.S. industry, and restore domestic production. As he's repeatedly stated, without manufacturing, there is no America. The U.S., a consumption superpower, has outsourced production for decades, eroding its middle class. Industrial heartlands like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania became unemployment hubs as factories shuttered. This fueled the populist wave that propelled Trump's 2016 rise. His next term aims not just to shrink trade deficits, but to reshape global power by reviving American industry. China is the knot that must be untied. Meanwhile, Beijing's reality is bleaker than its propaganda suggests. China's economic troika, investment, consumption, and exports, is faltering. Public investment has stalled post-property bubble, with local governments broke and infrastructure projects abandoned. Consumption is plummeting as factories cut wages and jobs, leaving citizens too cautious to spend. Exports face pressure from U.S. tariffs, EU subsidy probes, and Southeast Asian competitors. China's economy is self-paralyzing. Stimulus efforts, lower interest rates, reduced reserve ratios, fail as banks sit on cash with no borrowers. The government, hamstrung by deficits, can't pump funds as before. Looming overall is a debt crisis. In 2025, China needs 100 trillion yuan to restructure local debt, but can only muster 10 trillion over 3 years, a drop in the bucket. Confidence is eroding. Businesses cut spending, citizens hoard cash, and growth stalls. China resembles a car coasting on fading momentum, its cracks increasingly visible. Here's the crux. Without a real economic engine, China leans on symbols and propaganda. No kneeling isn't a show of strength, it's a sign of desperation. The timing of the slogan, paired with tariff exemptions for 130 U.S. goods, is no coincidence. Nor is the social media frenzy over victory as exports wane, or the invocation of the Opium Wars to rally a public clinging to symbols as material foundations crumble. This makes the situation more dangerous. When policy bows to nationalist fervor over reason, actions can spiral. When face becomes untouchable, regimes may cling to it with catastrophic decisions. The thicker the propaganda mask, the greater the crisis risk. America's allies, meanwhile, are its final safety net in this global restructuring. Trump knows this, which is why his second-term tariff war targets not just China, but Canada and Mexico. It seems counterintuitive, but Chinese goods exploit free trade agreements like USMCA to enter the U.S. via relabeling. Trump's strategy is consistent. Block the back doors by tightening trade pacts and pressuring partners. Vietnam, once a major beneficiary of U.S. China tensions, now faces scrutiny as a potential conduit for Chinese goods. So do Mexico, Thailand, and even Japan and South Korea, whose supply chains intertwine with China's. Trump isn't fighting Beijing alone, he's rallying allies to form a barrier. This heralds a geopolitical economic realignment unseen since post-World War II. China counters by deepening ties with nations facing U.S. tariffs, Russia, Central Asia, Africa, Latin America, while stoking anti-American propaganda and nationalism at home, even reviving Opium War imagery to cast the U.S. as a new Western invader. Ironically, today's China mirrors the Qing dynasty's blend of political myopia and economic impotence. Can China's export-driven model survive as its largest market, the U.S., builds walls? No. And they know it. The U.S. trade deficit, $918 billion in 2024, or 3.1% of GDP, is a classic global economic paradox. Some economists normalize it, citing theories like current account deficits offset by capital account surpluses, or the Tariff dilemma, where the dollar's reserve status requires U.S. overspending. But theory is one thing, reality another. Ask Americans paying $2,200 monthly rent if deficits feel normal. Ask 35-year-olds stuck renting, unable to buy homes. Ask middle-aged workers juggling two jobs to survive, unlike their parents who thrived on one. They bear the cost of distorted globalization, where elites reap profits and the masses pay the price. Soaring housing costs, rising taxes, vanishing manufacturing jobs, and a shrinking middle class paint the real post-globalization America. Trump doesn't need textbooks to see this. He feels the anger in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, where factories and hope have faded. That's why he targets the trade deficit, not as a math problem, but as a battle to restore the American middle class. Some argue deficits aren't bad, as import dollars return as investments in U.S. bonds or assets. But who benefits? Not workers or the poor, but asset owners. Returning dollars inflate stocks and real estate, leaving renters and low-income families squeezed by higher costs and fiercer competition. Cheap government borrowing fuels spending, but future taxes loom. The elite see theoretical gains, the public feels daily pain. This divide, between elite ideology and common sense, fuels Trumpism's rise despite fierce criticism. Trump speaks not to experts but to everyday Americans. His logic isn't just about tariffs. It's about reclaiming the manufacturing prowess that defined 20th century America. A service and consumption-driven economy, with production outsourced, risks becoming a hollow financial shell, rich in numbers, poor in substance. Trump seeks not short-term GDP spikes, but a rebuilt industrial base. China, the hub of cheap goods and substitute production, is the obstacle. Without tariffs, U.S. manufacturing initiatives like the CHIPS Act or domestic lithium battery plants, backed by billions, would drown in subsidized Chinese goods. China floods markets with cheap batteries, solar panels, and EVs, dumping to save jobs and stability. This kills nascent U.S. industries before they can compete. Trump's tariffs aren't punishment. They're a shield for America's industrial revival. China, meanwhile, repeats its mistake, guarding face over facing reality. When Trump hikes tariffs, they claim America is panicking. When they exempt 130 U.S. goods, they downplay it, releasing defiant videos to soothe the public. They frame trade as a spiritual battle where yielding equals defeat. But trade isn't about absolute wins. only interests and costs. China's internal propaganda may sway its citizens, but the world sees through it. The U.S., Europe, and Japan recognize Beijing's veiled compromises and growing weakness. A truly strong China wouldn't need to shout, "No kneeling." The repetition itself betrays fear. As this trade war unfolds, global supply chains no longer view China as the irreplaceable factory. American, Japanese, and Korean firms are building plants in Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Apple shifts to India, Samsung invests in Vietnam, Tesla expands in Mexico. As the world diversifies, China grows isolated, a slow, irreversible side effect of the trade war and a strategic win for Trump. Vietnam, a major winner in the U.S. China trade war, now faces risks as a potential backdoor for Chinese goods. U.S. warnings have escalated, and Trump's second-term tariffs increasingly target allies. If Vietnam doesn't tighten origin controls and transparency, it risks becoming collateral damage. It must shift from passive beneficiary to proactive player, mastering supply chain standards to remain a trusted partner in the new economic order. In the coming months, as the U.S. presidential race heats up, expect more brinkmanship. Trump will likely intensify anti-China rhetoric on tariffs, tech, and economic security, adjusting based on market reactions. China, with a slumping domestic economy and exports as its last lifeline, faces a stark choice: concede quietly or risk collapse if markets close. Beijing knows this, but manages the crisis with words, not reforms, delaying the inevitable. The American public, meanwhile, has lost faith in globalization. They don't care about Triffin's dilemma. They want stable jobs, affordable homes, and a future free from debt. The middle class, battered for 30 years, found a voice in Trump, who speaks not in academic jargon but in raw anger and aspiration. His tariffs are both economic tools and a rallying cry, waking Americans to their own fight. Vietnam stands at a crossroads. Opportunity lies in crisis, but only for those who act. If Vietnam fails to master origin standards and industrial capacity, it risks being swept into the tariff storm as a trade manipulator. To thrive, it must shed its secondary factory role and emerge as a strategic link trusted by the West. Ultimately, this trade war won't end in a handshake. It will reshape the world quietly. Pride doesn't save supply chains. Propaganda doesn't create jobs. Nations that evade reality will be crushed by it. The questions remain. Will China hide its crisis behind slogans or cut its losses to survive? Can America stay disciplined to rebuild its industries or succumb to short-term gains? And will Vietnam cling to its workshop role or forge a bold new identity in the 21st century? If you found this analysis compelling, please like, comment, and subscribe to WorldView Today for more sharp insights. The world doesn't wait for us to wake up, and sometimes a single moment of hesitation can cost a historic opportunity.